My name is Pete Young, and I am currently on home assignment with AMAIR, talking to our supporters and going around the country and connecting with them again as we've been gone for 4.5 years, and so it's a great time to connect with them. And going forward after home assignment, we're actually opening a new position, and so T and I are going to be working, my wife and I are going to be working with our candidates who are past the technical evaluation and moving on towards Africa. And that's done through training at JARS. We're partnered with JARS, AMAIR is partnered with JARS, so we just work with that, but we don't actually have any personnel there. So AMAIR, we have decided that it's a good move. We had somebody there a while ago. He passed away in 2021, I believe, and we haven't had anybody since. So it's hard for people coming out to serve with us in Africa to not have any connection with any pilots or mechanics or any operational staff in Africa. So we're trying to bridge that gap between we are going to we made it. Yeah, so I was a pilot mechanic. I am a pilot mechanic with AMAIR, and I served as a pilot mechanic for 10 years with Africa Inland Mission with AMAIR. And then in 2020, I took over as the head of operations. Yeah, so I was a recreational pilot, so it wasn't a dream of mine to be a missionary pilot from youth, but I had built two airplanes, and had my recreational pilot's license, but it wasn't something I was looking at as a career path. I was an electrical engineer, so I sat behind a desk, very different than a missionary pilot. But God created an unrest in my soul, and I took basically a year to figure out what that was, and ended up spending a week fasting during lunch and praying and just saying, if I don't say no, what do you want me to do, God? And then just listening. No other words, just listening. And by the end of the week, midweek, missionary aviation kind of passed through my mind as an option, and I thought, nah, it's not something that I'd be interested in. But by Friday, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I came home and told my wife, and she laughed because I was always full of crazy ideas. But from that point on, we just started exploring. It was funny because both MAF and JARS were telling me that I was too old and that I wouldn't be able to, they wanted me they liked their pilots for 20 years, so by the time you get out there, you'd be well into your 40s if you go through Moody, and then, but SMAT had just started this program, like a full flight program. They've always had a full maintenance program since the 70s, but they had just started a new program, a 1-year flight program, so that's what led us to SMAT, is that we really were looking for what was best for our situation. And with an older entry into the mission aviation, it was something that really fit us well. I had life experience, which was great, but I had aviation experience from an experimental standpoint. So I always say SMAT filled in all the certified gaps that I had, which were many. The A&P there was great for me, as filled all that in, gave me a chance to work with the skills that I had still. And same with the flight program. I went in with about 240 hours of just, I had to unlearn a lot when I got to SMAT, and a lot of bad habits that I had learned.
Last but certainly not least, Pete Edward Young.
And yeah, AMAIR requires that you have 500 hours. I think I showed up to the technical evaluation with 500.2, so I was very close. But I was thankful for SMAT's input there. For us, it was very unusual. Most of the time, it's 8 to 10 years for somebody who's interested in getting to the mission field. But for us, because I had that experience before I entered into the training environment, it was very short. So what I did was I went for 1 year of maintenance and I got my A&P, and then I went for 1 year of flight, got my commercial and instrument and my tail wheel checkouts, endorsements, and high performance and complex. And then I think I needed maybe 10 or 12 hours of flight time to get to that 500.2. So I was able to, I flew actually, MAF has on loan to SMAT a 206, and so they use that for training, and so I was able to fly the MAF representatives down to Sun and Fun 1 year, so that was a good chunk of time. And then I think I flew them down to Georgia for another event, so we're very thankful for MAF's input into that. So we found out about Proclaim from an AIM pilot, actually, Jerry Hurd, and we had reached out to AIM kind of asking about what kind of options we have in this gap between getting to the field and in the training environment. And Jerry had pointed us to Proclaim and said, give them a call and see if that's something that they can help with. As you move towards the field, and Proclaim was able to step in and help us get to that point very well. Yeah, Proclaim, I know that they prayed for us often. That was a big thing, is that they would always send encouraging notes and just kind of checking in on our progress and asking what they could do to help us along. Very encouraging to us, as we were, like I said, untraditional in our path. And so we didn't really know anything about what we were doing. So Proclaim was able to work with us through that process, and we had asked about information on different organizations, and they were able to give us that information and help us make decisions to who we were going to go with eventually. And so we were very thankful for that as well. And of course, there was, as we were going through the process, before we joined AIM, we had, they provided a framework for us to have people join a support team, and they would donate to Proclaim, and that was able to give us an extra boost as we were entering into that phase as well. Yeah, specifically for us, it was the financial framework, is that they allowed us to talk to our supporters, say, we're with Proclaim, the donors are able to work with Proclaim, and then that was able to get us through the process of, well, we're in training and we're hoping to get to a mission organization, but we're not there yet. I think for us it would have been a lot more stressful. I think having that framework provided by Proclaim just lowered our stress level by 1,000%. It was so much that we didn't have to worry about, and when it came time to join actual AIM and AIM, we were able to just talk to our supporters and say, okay, now you can transfer that support from Proclaim to AIM, and that was just so simple and seamless for us. Just the stress level of not having to worry about that, and everybody working at Proclaim behind the scenes to make sure it was smooth. And I know we had a couple of stragglers, and and they worked hard to get those people transferred from Proclaim over to AIM. And so just having that logistical backup behind us really lowered our stress level a lot. Oh yes, this one was very clear. So I was an electrical engineer beforehand. The company I worked for, the bosses are all believers, and so when I told them I was going to do this, they were very encouraging. Sad to see me go, but then I said, hey, can I stay on with you guys as a contractor and do some circuit board layout and things remotely? So I would go, I'd go to A&P class from like 7:30 to 3:30, and then I'd come home and work, do engineering work until supper. So I was putting maybe 4 to 7 hours a day in on engineering work, and just kind of making that money that was necessary for flight training, which is very expensive. And then one day I got a call or an email, and they said, all right, the project you're working on is on hold. we'll let you know when it goes forward. And I said, okay. Next week, nope, still on hold. Second week, nope, still on, actually it's on hold indefinitely. And so I said, is there any other work? And they're like, no, not at this time. I started to sweat a little bit, and the fourth week I looked in the bank account and there was the exact amount that I needed for the flight training. And so I was like, okay, I got it. You know, God was clear and said, you've made enough. This is all you need. And from here on out, you know, you're just going to focus on this. You're going to set this aside, move on from your former vocation and focus on what I want you to do. And so to me, that was one of the things for myself and my wife, who were, you know, very concerned about where the next paycheck's coming from, is that God was very clear. This part has moved on. Now let's move to what I have. If you asked Tia, she would tell you that she was pretty sure it was a trust exercise, and that like an Abraham and Isaac type of deal, and that once we got to the mountain, that God was going to say, nope. I just wanted to see if you were obedient. So she was pretty sure, and yeah, much to my chagrin, she was pretty sure that I was going to fail somewhere along the way. And so she was like, well, he won't get his A&P, and I did. And that wasn't a problem. But then she's like, well, he won't pass the flight stuff. And each stage check, she's like, are you sure you passed? I'm like, yep, I did. So I've got all my ratings. And then she's like, there's no way he's going to pass a TE, a technical evaluation. And I was like, oh, hey, I think the best way to go into one of those is open-handed and say, all right, God, if you want me to go, I'll go. If you don't, I will stay wherever. And so when that happens, I think God's able to use you in great ways. And so when I passed the technical evaluation, I think my wife was like, really? Ugh. But then there was still our pre-field orientation, which is 4 months, and she was pretty sure that I wouldn't make it through that. So I made it through that, and she'll even say, until the day we set foot on that KLM 747, she was pretty sure that we weren't going to go. And so she's also a post-processor. So once we hit Africa, probably the first, I would say, 6 to 9 months, she was just kind of shocked a little bit about, wait a minute, what are we doing? You know, not that she wasn't ready to go, in a sense that she had been prepared by AIM and all the things that they did, but personally, she was just like, I don't think we're going. So, yeah, it's so important to live, as we all should, but just, this is general information, but to live with that open-ended, here am I, what do you have for me? If I don't say no. And those are the biggest faith-building, joyous, hard decisions to make, is when you're actually saying, if I don't say no. Because God will have really awesome things, but most of us say no at some point, and we're like, I would, but I don't think so. And if you can live like that as a couple, to say, okay, this didn't go how I thought it would, but let's look where God's working and join him in that. And if you can live like that, one small step at a time. I mean, it was never, we didn't have to leave for Africa when we made a decision. We took the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And that was the whole, that was, what if we don't say no? Because we had a house, and we had a mortgage, and our kids all went to school. And it was more like, but what could it look like if we did this? You know, how can God provide for us through this? And so there are always barriers. There will always be something holding you back from what God could potentially do through you and with you. And so, but I would say there a lot of times it is just small steps. And we just kept taking the next step and the next step. Well, the first step was to put our house on the market. And the next step was to move to Ionia, Michigan. And the next step was to go to A&P school, and the next step was to get our kids in elementary school there, and the next step was to join a church. And you know, like, it's never just all at once, it's just the next step. Yeah, I think he's expanded that comfort zone. And sometimes serving is uncomfortable, but that's okay, because you can look back and see his faithfulness, how he provides through those times, and then you realize, oh, I could live with where scorpions are. That's not a big deal. Like I can live and it's 110 every day. That's not a big deal. There's things that you think are way out of your comfort zone. And I always say this too, is that everybody has that level. So people in the US say, I could never live in Africa. People in Nairobi say, I could never live, that's like the capital city of Kenya. They say, well, I could never live in the bush with where the pilots are in northern Uganda. And the people who live in northern Uganda say, well, I could never live in the bush of South Sudan. And those people who live there say, well, I could never actually live in the bush. So there's always one step farther that somebody looks at and goes, I couldn't do that. But if you allow God to work through that, he'll put you in those situations and give you a chance to see his goodness. Yeah, it does vary, but one of my favorite things to remember is we do flights for an organization called MIRF, which is Middle East Reform Foundation, and they train pastors, like young men from South Sudan. And so we'll fly into these little mud strips and pick up these pastors, and usually 18 to 24-ish age, and we'll fly them to Kenya for training, and they go 3 months of training, and then they go back for a month. One of my favorite things is to bring them back, because there's usually, it's hot. It's maybe 100, 105. It's depending on the season. If it's rainy season, there's not a lot of dust, but it's very muddy, and so we have to be concerned about, can we land, and those kinds of things. But as long as we can land, and where to park, because if you park in the wrong spot, you're going to get stuck. And so those kinds of things, you get out of the airplane, it's hot, there's usually these big, what we would call horse flies, but they're even bigger. They take chunks of flesh out of you. So you're trying to keep them out of the airplane so they don't bug you in the next leg. But it smells like cattle. There's always, whether it's goats or cattle or sheep, there's always some kind of livestock around, so that's always prevalent. But my favorite part is the village always comes out, and they are so excited, and they'll be singing and dancing.
Together with
to welcome their pastors home. And I've heard them even say, I don't speak whatever language. They speak several different languages that we drop them off, but I'll always ask one of the guys that is with the organization, he's South Sudanese as well, and I'll say, what are they saying? And they're just like, what did you learn? The first thing they say, what did you learn? Teach us what you learned. And so it's so encouraging to see, their training is coming back full circle to share with the village that they're from about what God's word said, what they've learned, and how they can share that. So to me, that's always just super rewarding. It's been almost 5 years since the Christians were chased from the area due to conflict and persecution. And today is a day of hope. Behind me is the first supply run to Zemio Mission, with the goal of returning the people to Zemio from their displaced location, bringing in 4 rotations of things that they're going to store in a container. It's a good day. And usually it goes on for, the hard part is if you're on a schedule, you're trying to be like, thank you, can we move away a little bit from the airplane? I have to go. So you have to be gentle with those situations, but I'll usually sit for 15, 20 minutes just to let them celebrate and get their backpacks off the airplane and go on to the next village. So. Yeah, I mean, let me try to pick one. I think one of the last things that happened to me, and these aren't great situations, but when I left in 2025, South Sudan was devolving into conflict. The major tribe was warring with the minor tribes, and so there was a lot of actual armed conflict, and so we were pulling missionaries out to keep them out of dangerous situations. And every time we would go to one location, the next day it would get bombed. And then we'd go to another location, and the next day it would get bombed. Like, we were just one day ahead of wherever the conflict was, and just watching God work through that and keep his servants safe and ready to go back in good health, knowing that if it wasn't like that, God would still provide, and he's still good. But we're like, okay, he's with us, and we're one day ahead of this conflict. And so we were super thankful to just have him along and be working with him in that. Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at those situations and see God working is to look for it. We just don't look for it. And be aware of what the Holy Spirit is doing. And so if we can keep our eyes open and ask, how would my day have been different if God wasn't working? Or how can I see God providing for me today, in this situation? And if you can look at those things with that perspective, he shows up all over the place. And, when an ancient Hebrew prayer is just to thank God for the new day. You get out of bed and you're like, I don't have to be alive, but you have given me life today, so thank you. That's the posture where you can really see God working, is to just look for it. People always ask me if this is my dream job. I always say no. I had my dream job. And that was the American dream job of having a good job, enough money to fly recreationally, those kinds of things. But mission aviation is rewarding beyond what I could have even imagined. And that's being a part of what God's doing. And you can do that anywhere. You can do that through a church. You can do that through a small group. You can do that on your own. But being a part of what God's doing through mission aviation is so encouraging to me. I think that the most rewarding thing in life is being a part of what God's doing, regardless of where that is. Sometimes it's through mission aviation, sometimes it's through a church, but to be able to be a part and see God working with others around you is how God created us, to care for people and the things around us, and to really steward that well. And so when you're able to do that as a community, which is what mission aviation is, we're all in this together, and we're all working together. It doesn't matter if you're MAF or JARS or AIM-Air or UIM or SAM Air, anybody. It's such a small community that we're all doing this together. And so to be able to work as a team, as a group of believers towards a goal, is really rewarding, and to see God working through that. And you can do that anywhere, but it just is what we're doing now is mission aviation. But you can also do that in a church, in a different parachurch organization. It's just being a part of a community that is serving God and asking, what do you have for us? And that is where the reward comes from. I would say to encourage is just to be aware of your part in it. Like, we all can't do A through Z. And really, it's the body of Christ, and we're all sharing the gospel. And so it doesn't matter if you're a pilot, a mechanic, admin, safety manager, donor, sending church, anybody like that is a part of the team. People that pray for us, huge part of our team. And so just to be aware that all of us are in this together. And that's the encouragement, is that just know that when you are praying and donating and going, all of it is important. It does make a difference.